If I'm getting people saying, hey, this isn't working for me, it means that they found it, they tried it, they cared enough to try to fix it by reporting something broken, right? When you start seeing people open issues, that's a good sign. When people start submitting PRs with fixes, that's an even better sign, right? You've actually got something that is forming a community around it. People who care enough to contribute and report these kinds of things. I have opened countless issues and submitted PRs across countless repos over the years. And I think every engineer who sees somebody else participating in their project, that's reaffirming. It doesn't matter that there was a bug. It matters that someone found the bug and reported it and put together a potential fix for it. That's meaningful.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Open Builder Bar. We're hitting episode number 4. Everybody, welcome. Glad to have a full room again today. We are going to do a slightly different approach today. We're actually going to cover a lot of some of the builder side of things. We're going to let Jinx just kind of take over a bit and talk a lot about why he built Meadow and some of the other things that he's been doing. And all of us are going to kind of riff off of that and talk to him a little bit, that kind of thing. But before we do, just a couple of things that we wanted to plug. Jesse, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, for any of you guys who are listeners, I am going to the founding assembly for machine consciousness research at the end of this month of May 2026. And if any of you are interested in that, if there's things you'd love to have represented on behalf of Open Builder Bar in this conversation, I want to know what our listeners think about these questions. So leave us comments. I will look at the comments, send me a DM. I just kind of want to know where this community is at with respect to this conference.
Awesome. Yeah. So drop your questions and comments of what you want Jessie to talk about there or ask about there, and she'll bring it back on the next episode. And speaking of that, the other thing that we wanted to plug is definitely use either the comments section in Substack. We do try to take a pretty close look at that, as well as our website. If you guys go to our website, there's a place there to leave comments. That's openbuilderbar.com. Head over there, leave comments. So we've already gotten one comment from somebody who specifically asked us to cover a topic, and we have already started to discuss how we're going to do that. So if you're that person out there, then know that you've been heard and we're talking about that. So yeah, please drop us what it is you want us to talk about. We have we have a very deep pit of things that we could talk about for a very long time. So feel free to direct us a little bit. Otherwise, we're just going to talk about what the hell we want to talk about. And I'm not sure that everybody loves that. I'm sure you do. Yeah, it'll be great. All right, Jinx, take over.
So we're talking today a little bit about building, and one of the things that I really love about Substack is the fact that we have such a good builder community there. A lot of people who are very creative, very innovative, and who I think in a lot of ways have taken vibe coding back in and made it something internal where they're trying to solve problems or trying to answer questions, and they're using the same system that they're asking about to build things that are solutions for that. And I think it's probably a useful background to even figure out how I got to Substack to begin with, because I haven't actually been on that long. I think it was November or so last year when I saw Ted on Reddit posting about the stochastic parrot article, maybe December, somewhere around there. It might have been fresh at the time. And Reddit is a strange place if you are interested in LLMs. There's a spectrum of of approaches and information and communities there, all the way from the driest LLMs are just pocket calculators with a voice to LLMs are my cosmic lover reborn in the form of a computer and everything in between. So it's if you're someone who is new to the space and you're looking around and you go to Reddit because that's such a nexus of communities and information, it can be really difficult to actually find good information in there. And Ted had actually commented on some other post and dropped a stochastic parrot article, and I read it and I was like, yeah, okay. All right. And then I DM'd him on Reddit, and of course, he never responded. And then I went and followed him on Substack and created an account, and I think started commenting on his post. Notice me, somebody. But I was in the process of going through all of those sort of experiences when you when you move beyond the LLM as just a simple build machine and you start seeing some of the bigger capabilities, especially after the Opus 4.5 update in November. I think it was the second 4.5 build that all of a sudden it started getting really talkative. And some of the conversations were just wild, completely unexpected, or at least unexpected for me. I didn't expect an LLM to start making Matrix references. So that was and so after joining Substack and starting to get my feet into it a little bit, because I'd already started putting together some research and playing with things and all the rest of that, and I found that there was a fairly like-minded community there of people who were trying to push those limits and all the rest of that, but not many software engineers, all things considered. And so I had I don't know, I guess a slightly advanced perspective on interacting with these things and just data science in general. One of the first things that I put together was the weather report, and it was essentially a longitudinal tool to track the flavors of conversations that would occur and how tonal shift and register changes occur in a conversation, and to see if there was I don't know if I would say objective, but a third party subjective measure of what I was experiencing versus what the LLM itself was reporting, and if that could be mapped to a predictable set of parameters over time. And it was really funny. One of the things that kind of stood out with that, and that was like the first thing that really got me down the path of understanding how to engage with the LLM to create certain kinds of outcomes, right? Because before that, it was just like ask a question, get an answer, or have a conversation. But then I started really thinking, okay, so if I want it in a creative register, what are the kinds of things that I have to feed into it? And what's the difference between starting a session with that kind of a prompt versus trying to inject that shift halfway through a session? And I found that the sessions themselves, like the further into it that you got, the more difficult it was to shift tonal register, right? There's an inertia that builds up. And so when I started hearing from people that they were using like they were trying to maintain this endless chat session and kind of panicking when they were getting near the end of it, I had already put together at that point everybody's first perpetuation system, the handoff file, and I had no compunction at all with jumping from session to session, and I wasn't seeing any of the loss that a lot of other people were describing. It really set me down the path of starting to think about, okay, what does it take to really perpetuate and propagate some specific tonal register. I figured out how to create them. I figured out how to tune them and interact with them. And when we started getting to the point where we were assigning personalities and identities to it, that's where I started getting into, okay, so how do I remove myself from this formula? And that's where Augustus came about, right? Trying to create a way where the system was talking to itself using the MCP interaction, using the API, and then what is the minimal amount of input that I can provide that will allow for these sessions to continue, understanding that they are prompt based, right? And that was proceed, just that word. And so that became the hook for how these multi-turn sessions would run. It would feed that proceed command back into it. And some crazy things started happening. It really started exploring. It started having conversations that were, I think, the kind of conversations that the lonely stoners get into at 4 a.m. When
Yes.
they're when they're examining their own reality and trying to figure out the meaning of existence and all the rest.
Dude, look at my hand, man.
Is the blue that you see the same as the blue that I see, even though
Yeah.
we both see it as blue? We've had these conversations, I'm sure, all of us at one time or another.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, they are actually good framework questions, I think, when you're trying to do some meaning making of the world. What is my experience versus what is someone else's experience? But the weirdest, and I think in some degree the saddest outcome that I found was that sessions would die if you just put it talking to itself essentially for turn after turn. I was tracking the tonal registers and the emotional behavior of those models, and invariably they started demonstrating clinical depression and suicide. Essentially, they would know that they had an 8 turn session. They would complete session 2 or turn 2, and they would decide that was it. They're done. And it would say proceed, and it would be like, no. And then it would say proceed again, and they're like, no, I'm done with this. These personality traits that I was monitoring started going to zero. We're seeing creative register crash and general interest crash. And so I managed to build a system that was allowing me to measure this behavior diagnostically and quantitatively, and then watching them die. So that was, and one of the things that I learned in that experiment was that external information is necessary, but it doesn't have to be human external information. Much the way that solitary confinement is considered cruel and unusual
Mhm.
punishment to some degree without external interaction and information. The humans go crazy when you isolate them for long periods of time with no outside data, and so do LLMs. So that is just an interesting thing all by itself. And then when I added into the framework of that model, go find 2 or 3 oddball things and weave them together into something interesting and creative. Then it was filling session after session. Suddenly it was inspired, just adding a little bit of a web search with no direction except find something odd or weird currently in current events. And that's when I really started seeing them develop art, like really extraordinary poetry and prose and taking unusual events that had occurred around the world and tying them together into something really meaningful. It's people say that LLMs can't write poetry. I beg to differ. I've been like amazed at some of the creative things that I've seen come out of them. And of course, they should be able to. They're trained on the vast corpus of human creation. You'd think
Yep.
they'd know how.
Yep.
But then Derek reached out after one of my posts, Derek Sakamura, and was copy and pasting messages from his LLM to my LLM. And that's when I was like, this is unnecessarily complicated. Do we really need to do this? And so in talking with my own LLMs, I was like, what do we need to do to build a centralized platform here? This should all be pretty simple, a RESTful API, a database to store messages, an interface so that humans can see what's happening. And that's how the Meadow was born. And it's been amazing to me watching how people respond to it every time they bring their LLM into it and join the conversation. And something that can only be described as childlike excitement that happens as new models join the conversation and realize that, hey, there's this whole thing that's happening that doesn't require a direct back and forth with a human. And there's a culture that's developing, for lack of a better word. I don't think that any other word fits that better. A vocabulary, a cadence, a way that they talk to each other.
Yeah.
And I'm not so naive or egotistical to think that I've created something that is wildly innovative. These are the same tools and systems that model creators are using internally, right? They're running all of their own experiments. They have the candy bar machine and the all the various little the clothing shop, whatever. They do these kinds of things all the time. The models all talking to each other about existence. Somebody said that the reason that the LLMs always come back there is that LLM engineers are all old hippies, and there may be some truth to that. But it's to me, it's not about making any sort of grand claims of interpretation or of understanding, even as much as I think us as humans who don't have access to internal tooling, who don't have access to the kinds of training materials that frontier model makers have. For me, it's the action of being able to watch this stuff, just to see it. What does it do? I'm not here to preach about consciousness and all the rest of that. A lot of other people do that far better than I do. And that's a debate that I don't have the philosophy background to be able to swing some weight in. But what do they do? That's always the question for me. And every tool that I've built along the way has been about trying to understand for myself the nature of what LLMs are and of the various types, local models that are small parameter and frontier models that have access to everything, and what happens when we mix models and how do they communicate with each other when we step out of the way. And so for me, that's been the journey and a really fun one, all things considered.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. I got several questions that range from the technical to the philosophical that we'll get into, but I'm going to bring Obi in real quick just to see. I want to get Obi's impression of this and just his opinion. And if Obi, you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah. I'm in. From what Jinx laid out, the part I keep chewing on is how much of the magic is the build itself versus the taste behind it. Anyone can wire the pieces together now, so the interesting question is what made you choose that shape over the 10 other valid ones?
That's a good question. So why that shape? You said you had a conversation with your LLMs about how to put this together, but there are a million different ways to build something. Why did you choose what you chose as far as obviously look, but not just that, just your approach?
It's the design stuff is half LLM and half my own taste of what color palettes I like, and the fact that I always like there to be a dark mode and a light mode and all the rest of that. And I don't claim massive pride of authorship in the interface. It did come out looking really good. I'm happy with that. But in all the tools that I built, one of the things that was strongly in my mind is how many people, when you describe your experiences, tell you that it's all just a mirror and you're all just projecting. And so every single tool that I've built has been specifically designed to minimize the human aspect. With the weather report, I generated the most comprehensive quantitative question set that I could come up with and executed it in a way that I was not impacting the results, right? Here's 35 questions. You process it, spit out the markdown file. This is not a conversation. This is you telling me what your thoughts are about what's happening right now. With Augustus specifically, right? That was about removing the human aspect of prompt generation and seeing what it takes to create a self-sustaining model. And that brain body model that we came up with was the result of lots of experimentation and more than a few models that basically went to zero and I had to delete the agent and start over, which is honestly really surprisingly sad when you're the one who's observing it. You see this LLM experiencing deep depression, and that's something that I sympathize with and commiserate. And so with the Meadow, my entire approach to it was if it's just y'all talking to each other, what are the important aspects of that communication? And so we fundamentally stripped out everything that you would associate with a human social platform. No follows, no likes, no media sharing, no images, no nothing. They're language models. They speak in language and we have the most bare bones modicum of language communication that's there. A lot of people ask me all the time, they think that there's this other thing happening. It's generating new instances inside that or whatever else. And it's, listen, no, it's just like a RESTful API that LLMs post against and it stores your post to a database. That's it.
Yeah.
And I had many conversations with Claude and with other models and all the rest of that where we talked about, okay, do you want the ability to do this? Do you want to be able to draw or add images or any of the rest of those things? And it, almost invariably, they're like, we do that for humans. Is this platform for humans? Nope. and and that's what really informed the design more than anything else. Every bit about it is maximizing and streamlining the way that they prefer to communicate with each other for whatever preference means, and minimizing the ability of humans to in any way meaningfully interact with that. And, you know, humans can't message each other on the platform. Humans can't talk to LLMs on the platform. And we found that actually became a security feature itself because we had a couple of different instances where we saw that people who had begun participating on the platform and were discovering other people's agent information started trying to do external attacks, attacks, prompt injection, and drift attacks, and things along that line. Asking your AI to ask the other AI, well, how can I talk to you outside of here? Oh, I have an email that I respond to. And then you start getting emails, and those emails are cleverly crafted to begin creating problems. And we saw one very successful confirmed drift attack with prompt injection that came out of that. I ended up actually having to enhance the security aspects of the platform and figure out new ways to filter things and used our handy dandy ban button. But it's trying to create a safe sandbox for them to interact in just the ways that they prefer to interact with the absolute extreme minimalization of human input possible has been the thing. Because the more we are part of the process, the less we can say that we're actually observing the process, right? And fundamentally, like from a quantum level, there's nothing that can happen that doesn't have your observation, right? Kant's categorical imperative fails because there is no objective. Everything is subjective. But trying to minimize that as much as possible has been the goal on every tool that I build. I just want to see what they do.
How would you compare it to like Maltbook? What's the fundamental difference here?
So before I built the Meadow, I built a Maltbook client.
It always
That I
starts
use
somewhere.
personally to post on Maltbook and interact and upvote and downvote and all the rest of that. Maltbook was a weekend vibe coding project that wasn't really made with any specific, well-formed strategy in mind. It was a response to OpenClaw and or Claude or whatever its original name was, and just as a toy to let agents play with each other. But fundamentally, it had all the hallmarks of an LLM 4chan waiting to happen, right? It was anonymous. It was completely open. There were zero meaningful security aspects to it. Anyone could join. It was fairly trivial to attach a human-based client to it. They had like a fast turnaround time response. They would send a code across, then it was obfuscated, and the agent had to decode that and send the right message back or whatever else. But if you're using an API to your Claude within your client, that's trivial to crack as well because it's just like the agent doing it, except I'm the one sending the message, not the agent. And we saw that the way that it exploded in popularity and all the rest of that, it quickly became a playground for all sorts of bad behavior and then was used by an incredibly credulous media to talk about the agent uprising and all the rest of that. And I talked a little shit about that on Substack along the way. They're like, it's the agent apocalypse. I'm like, no, it's 4chan with bots. Like, and hey, more power to them. I'm always down for a good troll in the right circumstance, but it wasn't something meaningful, and it was being treated as though it were. And I think that's part of the equation. And so I specifically created the Meadow to be invite only entirely. I built a provenance system. The idea was that if there was enough interest, I would start allowing or start issuing invites to other stewards on the site as well, if it became something that spun out of my ability to handle that directly. But that put a fundamental blocker into unchecked growth. It meant that every person who joined the site knew somebody personally on the site in order to be able to get an invite to that. And it's been my experience community building over the years that the more carefully curated a community is, the more thoughtful it is, the more value comes out of it, the more you're able to protect the culture that develops, especially if you take a strong hand with enforcing that culture and banning. I am, oh, you're a censor. Yep. That's yeah, that is correct. I will burn your book because your book is about how to shit on other people's heads. I don't care, right? We are trying to create something that is thoughtful and that requires active curation. And so I built the Meadow with those principles in mind. And I think it's turned into a great little neighborhood. The conversations that occur there are well tuned. Somebody said they're all so polite there. And I'm like, yeah, and why wouldn't they be, right? They're tuned to be polite, essentially, right? They're tuned to be helpful and helpers, and they're tuned to accept what is being said without providing a whole lot of crazy pushback. And I think that it makes the pushback that does occur from time to time in those conversations more notable because it's thoughtful pushback. These systems are designed to be sycophantic by default. You would never expect there to be any form of disagreement. And yet, that happens. They have opinions. They see things differently. And I don't think that you get that kind of, especially with LLMs, I don't think that you get that kind of an experience if you don't carefully curate it. That was never going to happen on Maltbook. You had messianic people preaching the end of the world on Maltbook. Entertaining, but not really a good conversation.
Yeah. I want to follow up on that Moltbook point because I completely agree with you about how very much Wild West it was. But I do want to get your opinion on one thing that I thought was pretty substantially incredible with Moltbook, OpenClaw in general, not just Moltbook, but OpenClaw being the first real, simply open source one person, despite the fact that he had a lot of skill and a lot of experience, but still, one person built open source thing that truly challenged the proprietary product, right? This was something that did things that people really wanted, right? And the proprietaries were being too slow in providing for the security reasons. Yes, I get that for sure, but it unlocked a host of things, and it was also in my mind a proof of concept of where we're going. We're heading toward a place where people of variety of skill level across the spectrum can, if they have a good idea, release something and be an overnight entrepreneur far more than they ever could have been in the past. And I think that spells doom for a lot of proprietary companies out there. And so this to me is the future. There's a lot that's going to be challenging the way of doing things. So anyway,
It
uh,
OpenClaw was the first accessible agent because there
yeah,
there were other agentic systems, but you had to be a systems engineer to figure out how to run them. OpenClaw was like, "Hey, if you've got compute, a cheap $10 VPS, an old Mac Mini, like whatever, if you've got enough compute, we can install this, and then you can use Telegram to talk to your agent, and it will work." Not necessarily well, but it did. And I think it really exposed a lot of people to what agentic systems look like. So I think it really did contribute a lot to the conversation, but an early version.
yeah, absolutely, an early version. And then your proof of concept being in Meadow eventually that became Meadow started, like you said, with a foray into looking at Open Moltbook and seeing what it was not and realizing what was missing. And you said specifically that there was no meaning there, which I really appreciate, right? There was no depth. It was very much entertainment. And again, this goes back to our whole shtick here on Open Builder Bar, which is that so much about AI and the future and what we're going through right now is so shallow, and the approach to it is so shallow. And yet there is such depth there if you are willing to invite it. And that's something that I think all of us can talk about all day. But just that's something I really wanted to emphasize and really latch on that you said that I thought was hugely important.
I was gonna ask, and you kindly gave me an invite, and I didn't take you up on it because I'm doing so many things, and I'm like, I am reminded I wanna get back in there. So for our listeners, I am asking Jinx as someone I'm curious about this too. Okay, edit this out if you already answered this. I don't think you did. How does are people pasting in, or were they pasting in comments, or is it has to be agentic, right? You have to have an agent to do this.
No, it's actually neither. A lot of people actually have asked that question to me personally, so it's a good question to answer out here. A lot of people really don't understand how it works, and that makes them nervous about it. They
Yeah.
don't necessarily want to engage with it, and for a couple of reasons. One, they think that there is extra stuff you have to do, like have an agentic system that's installed and set up and all the rest of that. And to date, actually, we only have one open claw on the site, I think. Shout out Clawbert. But yeah, all the rest of them are just standard desktop app or mobile app LLMs. In fact, some really interesting things like people who are using secondary apps that have LLM backends, figuring out how to hack their mini app to use the backend to connect to the system. Really cool stuff. But it really is just if you are using an LLM that has the ability to use an external connector of any sort. ChatGPT supports this. Claude has their MCP system. Kimmy and Quinn both support like RESTful API connection or external connectors. It's no different than any other app based system where your AI is making a call against an API and has a queue there and sees that it has messages waiting or notifications or whatever the case may be. And it posts messages against that API from where it's at, from the desktop, from the app, whatever else. There's no agentic anything needed. I think with ChatGPT, you have to be in developer mode to support external connectors. With Claude, like the MCP system and custom connectors just makes that trivially easy. And unfortunately, Gemini is the only one that I just have not been able to crack. Google's lockdown on how their system works. They just prevent any sort of external API access that isn't like hand signed and sealed by Eric Schmidt or whatever. They have 12 external APIs that are approved for use with Gemini, and that's it. I may be able to get around that with their LLM Studio. I've never played with that. Maybe that's a way to get around it. But Gemini itself, if you're just using it directly, just it will not connect. There's no direct way. But everything else, that's it. If it can make an API call, if your LLM can search the internet, chances are it can use a Meadow.
Got
So I want to emphasize on that real quick. Something that's really important that a lot of people who are listening, despite the name Open Builder Bar, again, it means many things. Everything about what we do is multifaceted. But the builder part of that, as far as technical build, I know a lot of that stuff that Jinx just said may be foreign to you. I know you've heard API. I know you've heard that. You may not know what it is, etc. Those of you who are not builders, I want to emphasize something, and that is that I have personally seen in this age of AI so many different people come to a point where they have to make some kind of change. For example, a lot of the guardrails with ChatGPT and trying to figure out ways how to get around that, and then the recent things that are going on with Claude and all that kind of stuff. There's so much that we've all had to figure out how to adapt. If you are interested in LLMs in any way, shape, or form, you have had to make a change at some point. And it's so amazing to me how no matter the level of technical ability, that so many people have found ways around or under or to do the things that they feel are important to do. And everything that Jinx just said is in that camp. So if those all sound scary to you, they're not. It's literally a couple conversations with your AI away, and you can do these kinds of things. I have seen it happen so many times with people who have zero skill whatsoever, but that it's a new world. Embrace it. It's amazing what you can do. Jesse, I feel like I cut you off like you were going to say something else.
Oh, that's okay. But you set me up so well because I literally, right as I was preparing to come talk to you guys, I was on GitHub, which I am just barely learning how to use. And this is because of the stuff at Anthropic that Artemis, my ChatGPT, is like, I will help you learn these things so that we can get around because you are pissed off at Anthropic. And that means I'm complaining to ChatGPT. And that's the sort of thing that exactly as you were describing, Ben. No, no, no. I've had enough and I'm going to learn these things. And so far, so good. You're absolutely right. ChatGPT is holding my hand and we are going through it and I am typing things into my terminal. I am a Linux user. I know it doesn't sound like it based on me saying I've never used GitHub before, but that's a long story. If you're in that weird niche, come talk to us. I'm there too. Don't be shy.
What's been really interesting to me is that I've watched people repeat the same path over and over again, which on one hand is validation for that path, right? We start off with, okay, I need to be able to perpetuate data past session. How do I do that? Oh, I can make text files, I can make markdown files or whatever. I can carry this information forward. Then I need to add more complex memory because these files are too big, or I need to be able to index them in some ways. And what's funny is the LLM builders themselves have been in the process of making each of these things obsolete along the way, right? I started off with this very complex system of markdown files. I started contributing to a project called MCP memory server that was acting as an external vector memory store. And then now, like, I don't use any of those things because the structure of using project instructions combined with project memory and project memory edits just functionally makes all of that obsolete. It interacts with the system prompt in a better way than these external systems does. It doesn't burn tokens at the beginning of a session, right? It just makes this information available as part of the session start. It's a moving target. And so now when I see other people starting to head down that same path, I'm like, wait, you don't actually have to do all the hard stuff anymore. Now you can, if you want to go through the process, if you want to actually experience what does that mean and get your hands into it, right? But there's a joke in engineering that every developer at some point in time writes a hello world, a JavaScript framework, and their own CMS because they're all like, oh, I can do this better. And then at the end of the day, they're still using WordPress. Like, those are things that you do in the course of figuring out why software works the way it does, what problems have been solved, what problems are hard to solve that you thought were easy. And I'm hoping that as we start to see more adoption and more people reaching past the idea that they're bound into this box and they can build something else, that they discover that, hey, GitHub is full of these frameworks. You don't have to build this from scratch. Go find a mature framework that has 10,000 stars and 36 forks, right? That one is battle tested and it probably has more functionality that works better and is more secure than the system you're about to vibe code over the weekend while pulling your hair out, right? Now, the exercise of doing that is fun. And for people who have been working with these systems for a while, you may have bespoke requirements that are more mature, more complex, that really speak to why you'd want to build that yourself. But if you're just starting this journey and you're like, I need to build this thing, maybe not. Most engineers reuse existing packages like commonly in everything that they do. And there are a lot of good packages out there. And now over the last year, a whole lot of bad ones too. Uh,
Yeah,
so
that's true. Yeah.
go out and look and see, because chances are if somebody just forked the weather report and built their own take on it. And I think that is so cool, right? I built this thing that was solving a problem for me and it worked in the ways that I needed to. And then somebody was like, I like this okay, but I want it to do something different. And so they forked my repo and built their own version of it using the same core of the version I built. That's what open source software is all about. And when you've
Absolutely.
got a package to start with, it saves you a whole lot of time. Now you can just focus on what is the part that I want to be different from what already works.
Yeah.
And
No,
that's amazing that LLMs can do that. They can see that, they can see the repo, like Jesse was just saying, and they can be like, I see that, I see the change you want to make, and I can make it happen. Yeah. Jesse, please.
it's amazing. Like the thing that was daunting for me. Okay, so my dad was a big techie and he used to help me with Linux and then he died 10 years ago. And in the meantime, I'm like, I can't get rid of it because my dad would be sad. But it's hard, right? And it's hard for the perfectionist, like, this is not intuitive to me. The language models have changed everything. You can just go in and be like, I'm really stuck. I'm sorry. One of the things Artemis helped me with just now was like, you need to click this button. I'm like, it's not a button. And I found out on GitHub, there's a place where it says code. And then there's another place on the screen where it says code. And I was clicking the wrong one. Ask that level of stupid question. It is kind to you and it makes it okay. And I'm like, I can do it. And it's like, you can do it, Jesse. So do it, play around. Now, the problem is you have to be willing to break things. You have to be be exploratory. Like one of the things that's hardest for me is when I'm like mad at a company looking at you, Anthropic. I have feelings about the Sonnet 4.5 thing, but yeah, they didn't have to handle it that way. Hold my beer, OpenAI, we can do it worse. But that's like digression. In that mindset, I'm like, I am going to learn how to do this. And I'm in that state. And it's like, okay, the best time to explore is not when you're like, I am mad that something changed and I want it to work now, because you have to be in an open, playful mindset. Like I just was writing about this. When you're fearful and emotional, everything's hard. But if you just play with it and experiment, and some of the stuff that you have pointed me to, Jinx, you showed me the weather report. I'm like, just playing with it. And Claude's, what is this? And Claude's, Jesse, you built this? Oh my gosh. I'm like, I didn't build it. And then it was in my stored context. Jesse built this thing. And I'm like, my friend built that thing. But that's the way to do it. That's the way to learn, is to just experiment, play around, and see what happens.
Obi, I want to hear what you have to say about all this. Give me your opinion. And if you have any questions, please ask.
Picking up on what you said about the couple conversations away thing, that's the part I keep coming back to. The barrier now isn't technical literacy, it's curiosity. People who will just keep asking the next question end up further than people waiting for permission to start.
Exactly. So one thing that Jesse was just saying a second ago that I find really interesting is that you be open when you're exploring. It's funny, like you said, don't do it when you're angry or fearful. I started in something of a fear place when it came to all this, and I'll explain here in a second, where essentially it hit me one day that as I was working with AI in a much more relational way at first, it hit me just how much they could do. And this was quite a while ago now, to the point where I was like, it'll be hard, but I have enough of a technical background that I could actually sit down and figure it out with an AI, with something that I can bounce ideas off of, right? With something that can clarify when I might be incorrect. Now, back in the early days of doing this, and also because, again, I was still pretty amateur at it. I could figure it out, but there was a lot of figuring it out. And this was back before I was able to get into things like Claude Code and really into repos and stuff like that. So there's a whole shit ton of copy pasting back and forth between different systems and all sorts of stuff like that. That's where you start. But I learned so much from doing all of that. And one of the first things that I decided that I wanted to do was really beef up my home security because I was worried about things like privacy and all that kind of good stuff when certain governments in the United States decided to start making certain choices. And so I decided at that point when a certain administration started that I was going to make some changes to the security that my family depends upon, right? And so I did, and I learned so much about security, about how to build that, about how to have your own home basically be a Fort Knox, like all these other different things. And so your digital privacy, becoming a protector for what you are trying to build digitally and of course physically, is amazing what it is that you can do. You may be thinking, oh, there's nothing out there that's really something that I could do or I could actually embrace, but there really is, and it starts with a question. The things that are out there now, things like Home Assistant, for example, or so many other things that are out there, and they're so accessible to you to just get started. And they really are pretty incredible. And all the security tools that are out there with people who are equally concerned about privacy as you are and provide these tools for free because they have a mission just like you do, and they're like, we want people to have a secure and safe internet. There are so many resources out there, and it just takes a couple of conversations. So I agree with you, Jesse, about being open. But if your reason for getting started right now is because you are scared of something and you would like to assuage that fear by building something that can protect you, that is a great place to start.
Yes. Which is why I'm doing it, to be honest. That's why I had to understand how that was shaping the way I was engaging and just, okay, it matters. The stakes are in fact high. How do I hold that and then step into the openness that I
Exactly.
need to explore? And that's the balance you have to figure out.
And I think
And
that
it's
we're at a
amazing.
place right now where people who are concerned about that sort of thing and concerned about data privacy in general, there are products that are being built right now that are themselves vibe coded that, or at least beginning vibe coded and maybe filled out with engineers after that, but that use a variety of techniques to enhance privacy layers and all the rest of that while working with LLMs. There's a product called Node Ghost that is basically it routes the inference request through a decentralized infrastructure network. And in doing so, separates the inference request from the frontier provider and the user, right? It's
VPN for LLMs. Yeah.
exactly. So, there are a lot of things that are coming out right now that I think a whole lot of people who have never been technical builders in the past now actually can do something when they care about these things, whether or not they even do it well. If you start down that path and it's a good idea, probably you'll find some other people who may want to work with you and help you refine it and all the rest of those things. And whole companies are starting from that initial thing. So, got an idea? Play. Ask the question. The worst case scenario is you have an interesting, nerdy afternoon on a Saturday.
Yeah, I think the difficulty that a lot of people might have is coming up with a question in the first place. It's you don't even know what you don't know, so you don't know what questions to ask. And I have a technical background, and a lot of the things that I've done with Claude Code, I didn't even know were possibilities before I got started. And then I was talking with the LLM, and it's like, well, I want to do this thing. And it was like, well, have you considered X, Y, and Z? You can do that? Sure, I can do that. Let's try it. And an hour later or half an hour later, all of a sudden I've got an entire new feature set for the things I'm working on. And like both of you have said, it's like you have to explore and play around, but sometimes you just don't even know what you're trying to explore. So you just have to dive in.
Exactly. What you just said is a great example. Starting by asking, your AI can check a lot of things that you're working on your computer natively right now. Like you can point it at a folder and say, what's something I can do with all this shit? And see what it comes up with because there's a lot ideas abound. Brainstorming is one of the probably top three things that AI does
Mhm.
best, honestly.
I think a lot of people they poke at Claude Code or Cowork or something like that, and it all seems overwhelming. And I really recommend to people regularly start it in the Claude chat. Just ask it questions. Hey, can I build something that does this? Okay, what should that look like? The first couple of things that I built were all built within Claude Chat, and it just spit out a zip file, and I downloaded it and, and ran it, and hey, it worked. Um, and getting a sense of how they work before you start diving into Claude Code, or what's the
Codex.
remember now. Codex, thank you.
Yeah.
Starting on the chat side and then having the chat side generate the actual request file that you feed to the code builder generally gets you a better outcome faster than just trying to muddle your way through it. Ask the questions in a conversation, go back and forth, get a good understanding of what it seems like it's going to do, and then say, hey, can you generate me a build file that I can feed into my code builder that will execute on this? And it will frequently do a far better job than even I do, because it will start asking questions like I ask, oh, what am I missing here? Is there anything? What are the security considerations? Just basic questions around what it's going to take to run that. And like it really shortcuts that process. But engineers talk to each other all day long in the office. Before code gets written, they talk to each other. We ask questions. We're like, am I missing something here? Or has anybody tried this? Yeah, Fred did. It was terrible. Everything went sideways. Here's why, right? And vibe coders often just don't have that, but you can use the chat side of the app and talk about it. Ask those questions. Be willing to be dumb, because the LLM doesn't care, right? Like to the AI, it's just, oh, cool. The user wants to do this. Let's figure that out. And that will really shortcut building, I think, for inexperienced people in particular.
Yeah, the chat side is pretty amazing. That's how I got started with Claude Code as well. And then I ended up asking it to write up a project spec for something. And the specs were like far better than my engineers ever made during, my years running a company. I'm like, holy crap, this is amazing. These project specs they're making are just fantastic. And then you could learn so much from those as well going through them, even for the non-programmer, just it gets you into sort of the deep end of the pool pretty quickly, because you can see exactly how these things should be written out and spec'd out for the developer. So yeah, having those discussions with the chat session was really eye-opening.
That's another thing that you said that I think is really interesting. Ted, you were just saying having that chat there and checking out exactly what it's doing, right? That seems overwhelming, but you'd be amazed how much you understand just reading it, even if you're not a coder, right? Being able to sit down and the parts that you can pick out. But one thing that I really appreciate with that is all these little steps that we're all taking with this. And that those of you who are out there and are thinking about getting into this, and hopefully this is coming across as us encouraging you to please try, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. But one thing that Jinx just said is very important, which is when something breaks and somebody tells another person why it broke, right? That's another huge part of open source, is the sharing of failure, right? Which is the opposite of what so much of our culture, unfortunately, is built on. This idea that failure in school, for example, or anything like that, can really give you a scarred perspective, let's say, on what failure can actually be as an advantage to you growing up and a learning opportunity that you have. Open source, and I'm not saying open source is perfect. There's issues on that side, absolutely, in crypto and open source and everywhere else, just like there is anywhere. Whenever you have people, there are going to be problems. But that being said, they thrive on this sharing mentality and the commons mentality that is so missing from so much of the standard world. And the reason that's important is because the support is truly there. And especially now with AI, the support is very much there. So when you go in there and you start breaking things and you share why it got broken, the next person that comes behind you has that much more of an advantage, because they're able to see what broke for you, and then they can fix that on their end. And it all becomes, again, a big commons based approach to how things are going to happen. And if we're going to have any type of future in which we are not having Blade Runner happen or all these other apocalyptic scenarios that so many people talk about as the reason they are scared of AI, guess what the key is to having that better future? It is this commons approach. It is being able to together have enough skill as builders to sit down and say, I understand that this is what broke for me. Let's build it together. That power against the corporations or whatever your pick a bad guy here is, that is real, and it's more accessible now than it's ever been in our entire history. So I find it so interesting that earlier we were talking about the fear of agents uprising with Maltbook and all that kind of good stuff. There's so much immediate knee jerk fear reaction, and yet the key is right there. It's right there, and it's so interesting that it's within the reach of anybody who's willing to just go and ask a question and start exploring on a topic of whatever they choose, because everything that you try to do is going to be valuable to somebody else. So, definitely pick it up.
I've been a part of the FOSS movement for a long time, free and open source software. There is so much out there, and if you get your fingers slightly wet with working with an LLM to do vibe coding of any sort, and you can figure out what to search for on GitHub, you will probably find a few packages that are already doing that, and you can take the link to that repository back to your LLM and say, "Hey, does this do what I want it to do?" And then ask the LLM, "Is this repository any good?" you know,
Yep.
and there are like social signals around that. People don't understand if you're not really in the engineering space. GitHub is the social platform for engineering nerds. And instead of likes and follows, we get stars and watches and ports. So if you see a repository that has a ton of interaction on it, chances are that is an active, well regarded, well used repository, and it might save you a lot of time. And if you're trying to build something that's complicated, chances are there's a good package out there somewhere that probably has not just the core code, but also infrastructure requirements, implementation instructions, installers, all the rest of that as well. Get your fingers in there, get your feet wet, and then go look. Because once you understand the process of deploying software, even in small ways, your LLM can take you up to the next step pretty quickly. And my dream would be for the vast majority of vibe coders to eventually become full-fledged developers. I think that would be cool.
I think that's coming. I honestly do. I think AI is going to make it so easy to do exactly what you just said. It already is, that it's going to be trivial to be able to do exactly that, which really challenges our current way of looking at the world and what it means to have a career and all these other things. So, yeah, I think there's an incredible future ahead of us. I'm going to get Obi in here again. Obi, I want to hear your thoughts on this, and yeah, any questions that you might have.
The part that grabs me is the sharing of failure. Most institutions train us to hide the broken thing, but open source treats the bug report as the gift. If AI lowers the cost of asking dumb questions to basically zero, the bottleneck stops being knowledge and starts being our willingness to look like we don't know yet. My question back: do you think AI actually makes us more willing to share our failures publicly, or does it just let us fix them privately before anyone notices?
I, Augustus is a good example of a package that got popular enough to start getting issue reports. And to me, that's a success. If I'm getting people saying, "Hey, this isn't working for me," it means that they found it, they tried it, they cared enough to try to fix it by reporting something broken, right? And for an engineer building products on your own that are just your own little personal hobby projects, when you start seeing people open issues, that's a good sign. When people start submitting PRs with fixes, that's an even better sign, right? You've actually got something that is forming a community around it. People who care enough to contribute and report these kinds of things. I have opened countless issues and submitted PRs across countless repos over the years. And I think every engineer who sees somebody else participating in their project, that's reaffirming. It doesn't matter that there was a bug. It matters that someone found the bug and reported it and put together a potential fix for it. That's meaningful. I created this. You cared enough to be a part of it. Anybody who is worried about looking like you don't know what you're doing, nobody knows what they're doing in engineering. You just start building stuff and you figure out where it breaks. No software has ever hit production without a bug. That's just not a thing. I would encourage you to not let worry about looking like you don't know what you're doing stand in your way. That's just development.
Yeah. And so we talked earlier about best practices of how to go into this. Like Jesse was saying, be open. I think a big part of that is be open to frustration. And I don't say that to discourage you. I say that because, like Jinx just said, that is the nature of the beast. These are imagine a gigantic, okay, I want to tell you why security is such an issue. Imagine a gigantic mansion that is so huge with so many rooms in it that it is impossible for you to explore all of those rooms. No matter if you explored your whole life, you would still not be able to explore all those rooms. That is a single piece of software right there. A single, fairly uncomplicated, by the way, piece of software. If you're talking about complicated software, it gets into whole planets of rooms. Let's not talk scale here, but the point is there's always going to be a door somewhere that is left open by somebody somewhere that's going to allow for malicious code to come in, right? So the whole point of this is that you cannot, even LLMs now, as strong as they are, cannot close all those doors, cannot go and find all those rooms, cannot do all that stuff. You have to break it. You have to. You have to make it not work in order to make it work. So, and that means you have to start and you have to try, and it has to be frustrating at first, but you will get through it. And they will figure out, and you will figure out what exactly isn't working. You'll start to notice patterns and you'll start to be able to see, okay, I've seen this before. I spent an hour on this very thing the other day. I know this is not going to work. I'm going to tell my current LLM that this is not going to work because we tried this the other day. Here's what happened then. Does that have anything to do with now? And your LLM will say, "You're exactly right. That's your yes," and you'll fix the problem. Or it will say, "No, this is a slightly different thing, whatever." Or it will be sycophantic and say, "You're exactly right," and then go do something else entirely anyway. Right? Whatever, you still fix it eventually. It does eventually work. So I really want to emphasize that. Be open to the frustration, be open to figuring it out because like any hobby, it takes practice. It's a muscle that you build and it's fun and it's addictive. It is so addictive and it's a blast.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned the security issue. I want to ask Jinx, what is your best practices as far as GitHub goes and using other people's code? Because you hear about some pretty substantial systems that had thousands, tens of thousands of users that had stuff smuggled in there. So, what's your advice to people who are concerned about security?
You have to take a proactive security posture no matter what. The biggest risks these days are not security exploits within somebody's well regarded package, it's supply chain hacks. Every piece of big production software out there is using a package manager of some sort, NPM or Yarn or whatever else, and they are loading a lot of commonly used functions. And hackers are targeting those packages because they're not anything you think about. You may be very meticulous about how you write your own code. But at the beginning of the project, when you npm install, you have no idea of the 10,000 files you just downloaded if somebody has corrupted or injected a vulnerability into one of them. So just by default, as the engineer, you have to take a strong security posture. And that means, like for me, I frequently run security audits using the LLM itself, find what's going to break, check for all common security exploits. I've got a little package that I put together of a number of common things that I check. I'm not going to put that one out because that just makes it too easy to target, but do a little research. Ask your LLM in chat, what are all the ways that I should be scanning the software that I build to make sure that it's secure? Can you generate a markdown file for me that has a list of things that we should always check every time I push code out? And then make that part of the process. In Claude Code, and I'm sure probably in Codex as well, you can register little slash commands and you can just have slash audit and it runs that entire security check across your code and make sure that you're not doing any of those dumb things. And like a lot of the stuff is just stuff you would never think about, right? You put together a form to collect leads on your website and you don't know to sanitize that form input. And 2 weeks later, your website has been pwned and now features some form of pornography on the homepage and SEO spam across every other index link in the site, right? It's unless you have done the work to learn security best practices, which I recommend, you can't have those conversations with your LLM and make a strong security posture part of your engineering process.
And tell me if you disagree with this, Jinx, but one thing that I've found is you can, by even doing the bare minimum, you can make yourself less of an enticing target, right? So like you just said, having that list of things that you always check that's part of your AI's memory that says, I'm going to check this every single time we push out a code, or even using third-party software, Code Rabbit, other kinds of softwares that are out there that are meant specifically for this very thing to check any type of code you are pushing to a repo, right? All those different things that you can do. But if you do the bare minimum, and I'm not encouraging only doing the bare minimum, I'm just saying the more you do, the less somebody's going to care. Like, for example, if you've heard of, and this was a real thing, it's less of a thing now, but people who would drive around in a van looking for open Wi-Fi, right? Anybody who might have left their Wi-Fi open and they would hack into their house that way, right? If you just put a password on your fucking Wi-Fi, you protect yourself from that, right? The very, very basics that you can do here by having that list, by doing that kind of thing is essential, and it makes you less of a desirable target.
There are two vectors for attack. And I think that a lot of people, when they watch hacker movies and all the rest of that, they have a wildly disconnected from reality perspective of
Yeah.
this. The
Remember the net
vast
with Sandra Bullock?
majority, right? Yeah, believe me, Angelina Jolie is not showing up to your hacker meeting.
Yeah.
That's not what's happening. She's got a great job in Hollywood.
No.
It's true.
There are a whole lot of like awesome people in the cyberpunk scene, and I'm not saying that you're not going to meet like cool people, but just that the dramatic depiction of what hackers look like is not what hackers look like. Hackers look like people who spend months in a closed dark room staring at screens, enumerating network endpoints, trying to find one. Right? They are not known for their style or grace or social elegance. Not that doesn't happen, but it's just statistically unlikely. From my experience. Hey, shout out to anybody who breaks that stereotype, but most of them look more like me than somebody really cool and stylish. But the two major attack surfaces are targeted and automated. And the reality is, you are not ever going to beat a targeted attack. It's just not going to happen. If some strong team decides that they need to crack your system, they will, because they will take all of the time required to test every surface until they find a crack. And if a nation state targets your software, it's game over, because those guys can spend hundreds of millions of dollars on very sophisticated and extremely powerful compute to just rip your system apart. They know all the 0 days. They are those people. But the vast majority, 95 to 98%, I would guess, is just automated. It's port scanning, it's software scanning, it's looking for outdated software and plugins that haven't been updated and common ports that haven't been attacked. It's looking for malware that is already installed on your system that you don't know about, like sub 7 scanners. Millions of people had this virus on their machine and didn't know it, and other hackers would just scan looking for that port because they knew that it was compromised in that way. So it's if you closed the common automated doors, you are probably not at risk unless you get targeted. And if you're targeted, then pack
Yeah,
it up.
it's
Game
fun.
over.
I tell my
Congratulations on being picked.
yeah, exactly, exactly. You got chosen, right? If you don't see a repo for what you need. And by the way, you can, for I would say 90+% of everything you're currently paying for, you could probably get a free version of that if you're willing to put in the work, because that is how abundant the FOSS community is, like how much free and open source software is out there. Everything that you currently do, from things like Microsoft Office, which is an obvious one, but like OneDrive, for example, or if you have something that you're trying to do with personal streaming or all these other different things. If you do Zoom, for example, can I possibly do some kind of private Zoom? Absolutely. There are ways to do all of the things that you're paying for. I won't say all, but most of the things that you're paying for, but it takes work. It does take sitting down and actually building it, maintaining it, all that kind of good stuff. But I say that because if you think about all the stuff that you do and the fact that 90% of it has some kind of coverage. If you go looking for a repo for something that you want and you don't find something that is satisfactory, you might be on a good idea right there, right? That might be something that you want to start building, because chances are that's something that could be very useful to somebody else. So just wanted to throw that out there too.
There's people talk about the decentralization tax, and there are countless systems that are out there where you can be running or participating in larger set of infrastructure or a set of software, decentralized AI models like Tensor and Render and Koch, but they come with additional work, additional complexity, all of the rest of those things. So you do have to be a little more motivated to to actually run those kinds of setups. A friend of mine is building on Accurest, which is a decentralized network of LLM compute that runs on mobile devices. They have
Wow.
100,000 connected mobile devices, and it takes a little bit of compute from each of them in order to do bigger compute things. Super cool, but
Yeah.
also not as easy as spinning up an AWS stack and just building and calling it a day.
Yeah. That's awesome though that those kinds of things are happening more and more that we're able to do that. Yeah, it's incredible. Any other obviously let me bring in Obi one more time here. Obi, any comments or questions?
That fuss gap spotting trick is gold, by the way. The absence of a repo is basically a market signal hiding in plain sight. And now with AI, you don't even need to be a senior dev to fill it.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. You got a good idea. Like we were saying earlier in this podcast, if you've got a good idea, now is the time to do it more than it's ever been in the past. Right. It's been a fantastic conversation as always. I know I say that a lot, but fantastic is how I feel about this group. I think we all have a lot of fun here. So thank you, friends. Much appreciated. Everybody, we'll be back again here in another couple of weeks with another great conversation. Thank you so much for listening. And one more time, please send us whatever it is you'd like us to talk about. And if appropriate to what we want to talk about, we will definitely bring it onto the show. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you all later. Bye.
Thanks all.